I think they've done themselves quite a disservice here, throwing in a lot of unnecessary subpart information, thus kind of devaluing the program. Today's a big one, and today there is going to be ample information and good source. So this video was not scheduled for today. I actually had another video planned, which has obviously been now pushed back till Thursday. But then I saw KK Fit had released a new program, and although I have done a video on one of their programs in the past, I thought, you know what, great opportunity to have a look at their new program to see what's different. And also quite a few people actually messaged me saying, Harry, can you have a gander at this, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. So guess what we're going to do today? You've guessed it. We're going to have a gander, and I'm going to give my thoughts. I've got to prepare myself because I've got pages of notes to get through. Although I may not be able to include everything in the video, I'm going to certainly try my best, because when I say pages, I mean pages of notes. We're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about the program, give you my thoughts, opinions and input on said program before coming to a conclusion, stating whether the source is good or the source is not so good. Before we do so, you obviously know what must be done. 1,200 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if we could reach that, that'd be bloody splendid. If you haven't already, or in fact, actually, if you learned something throughout this video, then I'd really appreciate it if you did click the red button down below and subscribe to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, drop it down below for comment question of the week, and I shall do so. Before we crack on with the video, this is actually a bit of a double whammy today, and you're going to see why. It's not very seasonal, because obviously it's not Halloween, but... oh yes. Every time I see an influencer online posting that you can spot reduce fat, be gone, demon, be gone. So obviously this is the program. We're going to go through, we're going to talk about bits and bobs. Obviously I just want to clarify, I'm not going to include everything. I'm going to include what I can, because obviously I've got to be careful. Legal reasons, I don't want to overstep the mark. I am merely reviewing a program. I don't want to feature all of the program. And again, if I were to go through all of it, I'm going to be honest, I reckon it'll be about 2 or 3 hours. So I've picked out a few key areas I want to go through and talk about. But it's a 12-week program. It's a lean building program, and it revolves around power building. So that's essentially a combination of powerlifting and bodybuilding. Obviously powerlifting very much focuses on the big 3 movements of squat, the bench and the deadlift, and increasing your weight lifted on those movements, so your strength on those movements, whereas bodybuilding focuses more solely on, rather than specifically chasing numbers, but more chasing muscle gain. And obviously power building is meant to be a combination of the two, where you essentially focus on the big movements and increase your strength, whilst obviously placing a lot of emphasis on hypertrophy as well, so power building, so powerlifting, bodybuilding, fusion. So we've split into 5 phases. Phase 1 is kind of getting rough idea of where your strength is, kind of like the starting point, which I rate. I think having a good starting point is key. Phase 2 is weeks 2 to 4 hypertrophy. Phase 3, 5 to 10 strength. Phase 4, deload, week 11. And phase 5 is testing your max numbers again to see where the progress has been made. Methods of overload we're going to talk about. So essentially methods of overload very much comes down to progressive overload. So how you can do more and more each week to then essentially lead to the development and building of muscle, things along those lines. So increase intensity, so weight lifted, yes, fully back it. Increase volume, so the amount you're doing, yes, fully back it, again, within reason. Density, work performed in time, that kind of relates to decreasing rest periods, not a means of progressive overload I would personally track. Tempo, again, this references time under tension a lot, the speed at which you perform your reps, again, not a means of progressive overload that I would track. I would very much focus on doing more each week if you can. Extra rep, extra set, a bit of extra weight. When it comes to tempo, the one thing I want to clarify is time under tension, how I don't think it really has a mass place. And when I refer to time under tension, by that I'm referencing the deliberate slowing of the concentric portion of the rep. I'm fully behind, for time under tension purposes, the slowing of the eccentric, obviously within reason, holding the stretch position, depending if you're working the muscle in a lengthened position or not, holding the contraction. But what I'm not for, in most cases, unless for like technical benefit, is deliberately slowing the concentric portion of the rep. The involuntary slowing of the concentric portion of the rep yields better results for hypertrophy than the voluntary slowing of the concentric portion of the rep. So what I mean by that is when you're trying to explode the concentric as fast as you can, and it slows down because you physically can't move it quickly anymore, that's going to yield better results than if you were to try and control the concentric. Phase 1, yep, determining 1 rep max. This is fine. Again, these like calculators of roughly where your max is based on your 3 rep max are never going to be 100% accurate, but they usually are actually quite close, and I respect that. Phase 2, hypertrophy. Hypertrophy training consists of performing a selected amount of sets with a specific rep range of typically 8 to 12, but can range between 6 and 20 plus reps. Again, not necessarily true. Although 8 to 12 is kind of what is deemed to be like the normal rep range for hypertrophy, or that was always what was taught, the actual kind of best rep range for hypertrophy is usually about 5 to 30 reps. So as long as you're in that green zone, you're pretty good. The one thing I'm struggling to get behind up here is how the hypertrophy phase is 3 weeks. How much muscle do you expect to build in 3 weeks? Again, this very much depends on genetics, whether you're in a surplus or not, how long you've been training, so many factors. But realistically, you're not going to put on a lot of muscle in 3 weeks. It's almost like a token inclusion of a hypertrophy phase, just to say it's in there, but in reality, 3 weeks this isn't enough. It really isn't. We like to switch up some of our accessory / non-primary compound lifts week to week to keep training enjoyable. Sure, changing things up is probably going to be more enjoyable, a bit more fun, you get to do different things each week, but sadly, it will limit the amount of progress you're able to make. Let's look at progressive overload, for example. Let's say you're doing a dumbbell press and you get 30 kilos each arm for 10 reps. And so to progressively overload that, you want to do a bit more. So let's say you might do 11 reps or maybe 31 kilos for 10 reps, something along those lines. But if you then swap out the exercise the next week and don't do the dumbbell press again, how can you progressively overload that? At the end of the day, I'm all for enjoyable training, and if you want to switch it up because you find it more enjoyable and therefore can remain most consistent with it, then sure, go for it. Just understand that when you switch things up week to week, as they're kind of promoting here, you are going to limit the amount of progress you can make because you are limiting how much progressive overload you can apply, because you're not focusing and paying your attention to getting better at the movement and doing more on that movement, thus progressively overloading. I also like they've included deload. I think this is really important. Again, when you deload, it's very much up to you. I usually deload at the end of like a block or a cycle, but then saying that, I also deload when I feel like I need one. I believe we spoke about deload frequency in the most recent podcast episode. Obviously, if you aren't aware, I am involved in part of a podcast, which is linked down below, and that episode is going live tonight. So if you're watching this video, that episode should already be live. Click the link in the description down below and have a gander. Tell me what you think. So obviously they go through the macros of protein, fats, carbs, etc. Good stuff. Do you have to track macros? Absolutely not. If you want to, sure, go for it, but that is very much up to you, your goals, and what you feel is best for you and your relationship with food. If you feel like tracking macros and paying attention to the numbers negatively impacts your mental health and or your relationship with food, then it's not worth it. You don't have to do this. They say 0.8 to 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. So what I would do for this is, if you're in like a deficit, like a fat loss phase, you could probably justify going towards the lower end, maybe 0.8 to, I'd probably say about 1 gram per pound of body weight personally. If you're in like a muscle building phase or surplus, then I'd lean more towards the 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight. It's better to have more protein when you're in a muscle building phase, whereas if you're in a deficit or fat loss phase, it's better to have a bit less, because ultimately it's much easier to maintain muscle than it is to gain muscle. A lot of people have asked me my thoughts on reverse dieting, how I would approach it. For most people, to be honest, I just get back to maintenance as quickly as possible, because I don't think you need to spend any more time than necessary in a deficit. In fairness, I will give them, this is a really good looking program. A few inconsistencies I'm noticing here. Lowercase, lowercase, uppercase, 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 additional space here. Don't think these mistakes go past me, I've noticed them. The workout split was kind of confusing because it's lower push, lower pull, full, lower. So is this meant to be like a lower emphasis more on quads, upper emphasis more on push movements, the chest, shoulders, triceps, lower emphasis more on posterior chain, upper emphasis more on, again, posterior chain, so your back and your biceps, rear delts, things like that. I like lower upper, full. I think that's fine. I think it's a good workout split. For 5 days, you could lean more towards something like a lower push, pull, rest, lower upper, rest, something like that. But again, it depends on your goals and your preferences. I think 5 days a week training is plenty. I probably wouldn't do more than 5 days a week personally. RP obviously refers to rate of perceived exertion, so how much effort you're putting into the set and how many reps you have left in the tank, essentially. Similar to reps in reserve, RIR. In order to promote muscle hypertrophy, muscle gain, we want to be around the number 8 on the RPE scale, which means challenging. A good indicator of RPE 8 would be leaving 1 to 2 reps in the tank unless stated otherwise. PRPE. I assume that's a typo again. When looking at like muscle gain and like hypertrophy, as long as you're within 4 reps of failure, you're in the green zone for muscle gain and hypertrophy. But you also have to understand, do you know where failure is for you? Because a lot of people don't. And gauging where failure is accurately and actually be able to take things to failure is very much a skill you have to learn over time. So keep that in mind. So if you say you think you've got 4 left in the tank, you may well have actually had 6 or 7 left in the tank. FAQs. Question 5 is missing. Question 9 is also missing. So let's do it. Let's actually look at the actual program now. I don't want to overset the mark and show too much of the program, so I'm just going to go through a couple of days from the hypertrophy phase and the strength phase, like the two key phases. So first week of hypertrophy phase, day 1 is going to be a lower session. We've got barbell squats superset with kettlebell pause swing, barbell cannonball squat superset with Bulgarian split squats. Ooh, split squats my chest. Every time, flashbacks, I just can't do it. Step up superset with landmine hack squat, leg extension machine. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 exercises. Probably a bit excessive. Exercise selection, barbell squat, fantastic. I do like a kettlebell swing. Cannonball squat, I think there are probably better alternatives there. Bulgarian split squat, love it for how effective it is and how good it is. Hate doing it because it hurts my heart, hurts my chest, and makes me feel like I don't belong in the gym. Step ups, again, I spoke about this in the Evan Stern video. I think it's probably a bit overrated for the quads. Landmine hack squat, if you don't have access to a hack squat machine, it will do. But again, your ability to overload it is really limited, which is a bit of a hindering factor. Leg extension machine, love it, fantastic for the quads. I think if you are going to do like a hack squat variation and a barbell squat, I don't think you need to do them on the same day. That's a lot of sets in one day. That is excessive volume. I would say I would actually deem that to be junk volume, considering I would never do any more than up to 30 sets in a week, but realistically my total number of sets performed in a week is more along the lines of like 8 to 20. To be honest. Again, I've spoken before about the limited rep range, like 4x12. So if you're looking at going to like 2 reps in reserve or RPE 8. If you do that for the first set and you reach RPE 8, if you do it for the second set, it probably won't be RPE 8 anymore because you're fatigued. Therefore, to reach RPE 8, you'll have to drop it down in weight. So what I would kind of do is give more of a range. So let's say, okay, well, if you want to go to RPE 8 and make sure you only go to 2 reps left in the tank, you do, let's say, an 8 to 12. So you go 12 of the first one, then you might get 11 the next, then 10 the next, and then 9 the next, something along those lines. Then we flip on to day 2, which is an upper day, push focus. So we got barbell bench press, floor flies, military press, lateral raises, and a monster set, which is basically like a really big superset. I also want to note cable powerlift press, fantastic movement. I love it. I think it's a fantastic movement. Good inclusion there. Again, same thing applies. Excessive volume. Really excessive volume, actually. You don't need to do this much in a session. You really don't. My sessions rarely ever exceed 5 or 6 exercises. Rarely. My session sets rarely exceed 14, to be honest. I rarely do more than 14 sets in a workout. And they're doing 14 sets within half of the workout. So like the typical superset isn't really particularly ideal for muscle gain, and I probably wouldn't include them unless I was like really pressed for time. I think here they're included as a means of making you feel like you've done more, you've worked harder, but you're actually kind of limiting how much benefit you're getting from the chosen exercises by incorporating them to some extent, and we're going to talk about that. Supersets usually involve working 2 opposing muscle groups back to back with no rest in between, only resting after you finish the second exercise. This often yields like a high level of systemic fatigue and then a low level of stimulus, because it's essentially targeting different muscle groups. Therefore, stimulus per muscle group is limited here, but fatigue might be up here. Whereas supersets with the same muscle group, like for example the chest here, like the pecs and the pecs, the bench and the fly, I would say have more of a place. The fatigue to stimulus ratio is a bit more favourable, but I would be more specific. So for example, we've got a military press, which is very anterior delt heavy, and a lateral raise, which is very side delt heavy. If I were going to do a superset with the same muscle group, I'd be really specific and go, rather than going anterior side, I'd go anterior anterior or side side. Probably like 2 lateral raise variations. So sure, supersets and things like that do have a time and place, but again, I would avoid doing so with opposing muscle groups unless you're pressed for time. And maybe if you are going to do them with the same muscle group, but be really specific with exactly what you're trying to hit within that muscle group, and just ensure you are working that muscle group maybe through a different range of motion, targeting either the lengthened, the mid, or the shortened position. But as a whole, I think a monster set is largely unnecessary. I think like a dumbbell front raise is a bit overrated anyway. Upper row, again, I'm not a massive fan of them myself. Reverse fly, fantastic movement, provided you're doing it properly. Sure, it will give you a sick, nasty pump, but does that necessarily mean it's effective? Also, I just want to point out, curtsy lunges. I know a lot of people like the curtsy lunge. Again, what's wrong with the normal lunge? Arguably more effective, depending on what you're trying to achieve. The thing I really don't like is this. See what 3 movements we have here on week 2 of the hypertrophy phase. Whereas we go back up to week 1 of the hypertrophy phase, different movements, different order. Again, this comes back to what I said earlier about enjoyment and changing movements all the time. Again, if you want to do it purely for enjoyment, sure. But again, that does limit your ability to make progress. It's really hard to track progress if you keep changing movements. I've done the same movements in my workout plan for months on end because I'm still progressing at them. And obviously I'm trying to optimize the building of muscle, which I fully acknowledge and understand that a lot of you might not be. I don't change movements unless my goals change. I don't change movements unless I can no longer progress those movements, or I don't change movements unless I'm painfully bored of working out and have no motivation to work out anymore because the routine's so repetitive, which again is a rarity. It's a real rarity. Like, it's very easy for influencers to fall into the trap of just changing things all the time to keep it fun and exciting. Like I said, that is going to limit how much progress you can make. I feel like a lot of influencers may feel like pressure to change up so they don't get seen as boring. In reality, it's actually more ineffective than if you were to just be consistent and just get good at specific movements that are also going to have a greater carryover to what you're trying to achieve, be that muscle gain or strengthening the compound movements, the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. And it also teaches people, I think, that changing workouts all the time is like encouraged for muscle building when it's not, because I know there's a big myth of you need to shock the muscle. Shocking the muscle doesn't exist. If anyone says, I do this to shock the muscle, you tell them that your muscle probably needs to go speak to a professional, because if it's shocked, that's probably a concern. Don't feel the need to change things for the sake of changing things. If you can't justify why you're changing it, you probably shouldn't change it. But again, boredom is a justification. So if that's your justification, then go for it. Same with movements. If you can't justify why you're doing them, probably don't do them. We're going to look at week 10 strength now. So towards the end of the program, see how things have changed. We're in the strength phase, just before the deload. I want to see what's going on. And obviously we're going to look at the similar days because I want to keep things as consistent as possible. The reps have changed a lot. It's 12, 8, 6, 6. What I would actually prefer is if they literally did a 6 to 12 so you can fall within that rep range. I think a lot of people will reach the 8 on their second set and be like, well, I've done 8, I don't need to do any more. When in reality, it's like, well, you need to push to the prescribed RPE or RIR. And I worry that people are going to fall into the trap of seeing this as like a rep limit, when in reality it's a rep target. If you do 8 reps and you've still got 4 left in the tank, it's probably worth pushing to 10, so then you do only have 2 reps left in the tank. So for that reason, I would very much push towards a rep range of like 6 to 12 rather than saying 12, 8, 6, 6. Again, the tempo's now in here, but beforehand it was controlled, now it's actually got specific tempo. To be honest, I say for most movements, slow eccentric, hold the stretch, fast concentric, hold the contraction. I probably wouldn't do that on the squat, bench, or deadlift because ultimately you don't want to pause the reps unnecessarily. Whereas on a movement more aligned for hypertrophy and for the hypertrophy aspect of the program, like a split squat, etc., then I probably would. Elevated done with goblet. I've actually already spoken about goblet squats. I don't think they're particularly effective for quad development. I did this in I'll say the Aaron Stone video where I spoke about the front squat. Other areas are going to fail before your quads do. So your arms might fail, your shoulders might fail, your core might fail, thus limiting your ability to your quads close to failure. Leg extension machine, fantastic. Drop set, I don't really think you need to. To be honest, I think drop sets, you can if you want to, but I don't think you need them in your workout. Reduce the volume down to 6 exercises. I like that, that's much better. But again, the number of sets is still excessive. Rest in between sets, I literally rest for as long as you need. I would never rest for a minute when looking at optimizing muscle building. It would probably be more 2 to 4 minutes, maybe even 3 to 4. Rest for as long as you need, but for at least 2 minutes, I would say. Day 2, same sort of thing, bench press, military press, pronated chest fly. I back the bench press. I think the standing military press, if you want to do it, sure. But if you're looking at like optimizing muscle building, I'd probably go for a seated variation because then you can lift more without the core and things hindering your ability to shift the weight. Again, obviously spoke about the bench press being a bit overrated for pec development, but I understand it's included in this program for the powerlifting aspect. So squat, bench, and deadlift, fine, support it. Pronated chest fly with a supinated chest fly. If I'm doing any kind of fly variation, neutral grip. I'm not pronated, I'm not supinated, I'm neutral. See the lateral raise, good, lateral raise is fine. Again, same sort of thing, reps better because you've got more variation, but again, I would just go for a range rather than targets. Remember, they're targets, they're not limits, so if you can do more, do more. And if you don't hit them, that's not your fault and that's nothing to feel guilty about. It's a really good looking program. And there's a lot of good information in this program, and I will speak through it. Obviously, I didn't show you everything on screen because again, I have to be careful what I show. I can't do too much. I think they've done themselves quite a disservice here, throwing in a lot of unnecessary subpart information, thus kind of devaluing the program. When there is so much good information in here, it's just such a shame to see that being done. I will note throughout, obviously, they've got links to the exercises. So if I click this, it takes me to a link to the exercise. I like that. I think that's really good. The fact they've included that, I'm really impressed by, and I think it's a fantastic feature. I think Catherine and Kendra are sacrificing a lot of optimization purely for the sake of keeping the program unique and maybe placing too much emphasis and worry on enjoyment. But again, if it does allow you to remain most consistent with it, then fair enough, I support it. But the big thing we need to discuss now, the biggest thing, which is probably the thing you're all asking, is how much does this program cost, Harry? There's obviously a lot of information here, but we've got 98 pages. So this program, all 98 pages of it, is just shy of $250, which I think is a lot of money. As someone who cares for you, and someone who cares for your wallet and your bank account too, no one-off generic / universal program is worth that much money. And off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that would make a program worth that much money. I think that is a stupid amount of money. And the sad reality is, I think a lot of people are actually going to buy it because of their status in the industry, being quite well-known influencers. I'm not trying to sound disrespectful, because I always appreciate and respect people for helping people get into fitness, guiding them, and I appreciate how much effort they put into the program. But for $250, that's greedy. And that is a rip-off in my eyes. I really think it is a rip-off. And another thing to note that does really kind of limit the value of the program is how much excessive junk volume there is in here. Like I said, so many sets, so many exercises, so many supersets, monster sets, drop sets, things you don't need to include for the most part. What I would do when designing a program, let's say you're doing 5 days a week, between 5 and 6 exercises per day, roughly, between probably 2 and 3 sets for most exercises, but if you're squat, bench and deadlifting for the power building, powerlifting purpose, I maybe consider additional sets like 4 or 5 perhaps, but for most exercises, between 2 and 3 sets, reps anywhere from 5 to 30, total number of sets in a session, let's say 14 to 16. Total number of sets per muscle group per week, anywhere from 8 to 30, and that's going to be split over multiple sessions. So if you're training a muscle group 2+ times a week perhaps. Resting for as long as you need, probably at least 2 minutes. Going within 4 reps to failure, so anywhere from 4 to 0 reps left in the tank is what we're shooting for, the green zone. So to failure, if not to close proximity of failure. Tempo, same thing, controlled eccentric, hold the pause, hold the contraction, fast concentric for most movements, not all of them. That alone is a pretty effective and solid means of structuring a program for you. Increase quality by decreasing quantity and maybe going from there. Ultimately concluding that, no, this is not worth the money, although I do appreciate the effort they have put into this program. At the end of the day, these are just my thoughts and opinions and my review of this program. You've always got to do what's best for you, and only you know what that is. But now that's done, I've waffled a lot. We're going to crack on with comment question of the week. I'm currently doing home workouts, but I want to start going to an actual gym, but I have a lot of gym anxiety. What are some tips for getting over that? What I would do is I'd approach things with really small and realistic goals. Don't go into the gym with the idea of you're going to do a full workout. Literally go into the gym with the idea of you're going to sign up. You've made it through the door, you've done the hardest bit now. And maybe the next time you go, you could do an induction with a PT or member of staff there where they just show you around, give you a tour, things along those lines. Maybe the next time you could go, you can maybe say you're going to walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes. If you want to do more, you can do more, but baby steps are still steps. Build up to it like you would with training. You progressively overload. Don't set yourself unrealistic goals and expectations. Walking through the door is challenge enough, and if you overcome that, you've made huge steps in the right direction. When you do feel like you're eventually comfortable to start working out, have a plan of what you're going to do, but do not expect to complete the plan. Let's say you have 4 exercises listed that you want to do. Your goal would be to do at least 1 of those exercises, and then maybe 2, and then maybe 3. Once you kind of got through the door, maybe on the treadmill, or maybe started doing your first exercise, I think that the big overwhelming anxiety that's consuming you at the moment may start reducing. Ultimately, the anxiety often peaks when we're thinking about it and anticipating it, but once we're actually there and doing it, it does often tend to reduce. And nothing is, try going with a friend. If you have a friend with you and you can maybe share your thoughts, saying, I'm feeling really anxious about this, I really appreciate you coming with me. They'll be there to support you and help you however possible. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that provides some benefit. Like I said at the start of the video, if you like the video, please let me know you like the video by dropping a like on the video. 1,200 likes in the first 24 hours is the goal, so if we could shoot for that, that'd be bloody splendid. If you haven't already, please do consider clicking the red button down below and subscribing to the channel, and maybe even the bell next to it so you get notified when I upload every week, twice a week. And if you too have a question you want me to answer at the end of the next video, drop it down below for comment question of the week and I shall do so. Thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my Devil's Trident thingy-majig, and thank you for tolerating the video.